when the tools aren't tweaked in the right way or used in the right way, your company sounds like everybody else because the tool you put in the same input that everybody puts in, and then it brings out the same output. And I don't care if you're talking on a personal level, on a corporate level, an enterprise level. If you don't have good inputs, you're not going to get good outputs. And if you have good inputs and you get good outputs, you have to know how to understand what those outputs mean and do something with it.
AI isn't the future, it's now. And whether you're in HR, sales, operations, or leadership, the choices you make today will determine whether you thrive or get left behind.
So welcome today to AI Voice of Victim. I am Greg Boone, CEO of Walk West. And today I have a great guest, Mr. Brett Berhoff, a Bay Area-based business strategist and AI advisor who works with founders and executive teams on growth, partnerships, and go-to-market strategy. Welcome, Brett. Why don't you tell me a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Greg. Thanks for having me on the show. So I partner with companies right now. It's across many markets, but of course, with everything going on, and part of the reason we're on today, AI is really the big push. So I find myself doing a lot of AI advisory work, but it doesn't really matter whether this is an actual AI company that I'm working with, because a lot of times this could be a healthcare company or a music company or a manufacturing company, because we have AI sort of woven into the background or beginning to weave and mesh into the background of all these companies.
Yeah, I mean, it's like back in the day when they say every company is a computer company, right? Every company is an AI company, right? Because it's a thing that you use. Right. It doesn't matter if it's a thing that you actually do. So just tell our audience, I'm based in Raleigh, North Carolina. Where are you coming from today?
I'm coming from the Bay Area. So I'm in San Francisco, specifically over the bridge in Marin County, but I'm back and forth all the time.
Okay, so you're like in the thick of things, right? Like you're like in this. To call it a bubble is an understatement, right? You guys are where the action happens, where all things
That's
are.
Right.
AI, right? What's that feel like, man? I'm in the Southeast where I feel like at times I'm on an island. What's it feel like for you out there?
You know, it's, I guess you feel like you're on an island, but for me, it really feels like I'm in another world, right? So when you drive into San Francisco, the first thing you'll notice is the billboards are all AI billboards, right? So you've got AI companies, .ai at the end of the domain extensions. And then when you look down, you notice that half of the cars don't have drivers, right? So it literally, there's people in the cars, but they're not behind the steering wheel. There's nobody behind the steering wheel, right? So you're surrounded by driverless cars.
Yeah, that's not, I wouldn't describe that as Raleigh or this area. As I tell people all the time, you know, you can really tell a lot about a city based on its billboards. And so, as you can imagine, there's a lot of things around the lottery and guns around here. Not so much AI, but every time I go to San Francisco, I mean, to your point, it is AI, especially coming from the airport, every billboard, right, and going to the airport, and then downtown. I'm going to admit something to you. I've still never been in a driverless car. I've never been in a Waymo. Everyone that I've ever heard say they've been in one said it's a magical experience. Is that your experience?
Yeah. So yeah, I love it. It's now I'm very pro driverless cars. Some people are very anti, and some people don't care. I'm all for it. You know, when I was a kid and I would go to the auto shows with my father, my favorite part of all the auto shows was the prototype cars. Like, what are these cars going to do in the future? And you know, when I was a kid, it was like, oh, this one's going to have a digital map. Right. And now we don't even think about a digital map. We've all got GPS just built into the car and built into our phone, whatever. But that was sort of forward facing and future. But with these driverless cars, you get into a Waymo and it does such a good job. You feel like you're on a Disney World ride, right? You know, like it's doing the things that we do, or a taxi would drive us, or an Uber, and it's picking up, it's dropping it off. It's very, very cool. I find it very comfortable. And again, like I said, when you look around, if you come in at any given day, half of the cars feel like you're surrounded by these driverless cars. Now, it's not only Waymo in the Bay Area, because we've got the biggest concentration of driverless cars in the United States, right? So this really, to your question about how this looks compared to East Coast, it just, AI is in these vehicles, right? So we tend to think of AI being woven into all these companies, but here are these cars driving themselves with AI technology included in this. And there's another company called Zoox, and Zoox has another vehicle that, so the Waymo was actually a converted standard Jaguar car, whereas Zoox was built from the ground up. And this car doesn't have a front or a back, right? It's got like sliding glass doors, and you come in and you sit facing each other, and there are no pedals, and there's no steering wheel in a Zoox, right? So these things are zipping around town with no pedal and no steering wheel. So it really is kind of like being in the future.
Yeah, the Zoox, I see them in Vegas. And at first, I had no idea what I was looking at, to your point. I was like, I didn't know what the front or the back. It just looked like this rectangle with sliding doors. But there was this kind of mental moment I was having where I was like, for some reason, I felt like I would be more comfortable getting into that than the Jaguar with the steering wheel. And I think that's part of the psychology behind it. It was like it was purpose built for this versus,
that's right,
hey, we're going to strap this LiDAR and these cameras to this Jaguar, and you're just going to get in and have fun. One of the things that's it's a little bit funny to me, because my dad's a retired truck driver, and I told him, I said, you got out at the right time, right? Because even your kind of job is going to be impacted in some way. But one of the things you said that kind of reminded me of when Uber first came out and how the taxi industry was so upset at Uber drivers. And then my last few times in San Francisco and in Vegas, the Uber drivers are mad at the driverless cars, right? And so
that's right.
The impact is real, and the disruption continues to happen coming out of Silicon Valley. So let's take it back to your home front where you are. I mean, you focus a lot on go-to-market, right? And how are companies in Silicon Valley thinking about AI differently? Like, I'm trying to get perspective. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to help our audience learn.
It's less thinking about AI differently to begin with than it is thinking about AI as a forefront concept, right? So in the Bay Area, because so many companies, we are at ground zero for AI here. So, we've got an incredible concentration of AI engineers, which then and AI companies, and then it sort of overflows into AI users, and then the companies using it, and just people using it, and again, it's on the billboards, it's in the cars, and you're sort of swimming in it. So I think less about how it's being used at the moment, and more about that it is here to be used, right? So it's like, this tool has arrived. So when we think about the invention of the calculator, right? So the invention of the calculator, before that, people were doing, if doing long division and writing everything out, whereas the calculator comes out, and now the calculator in terms of math can pretty much do every calculation you need, right? And so we've got this calculator, AI, that can kind of do everything, right? And so the adoption comes with companies across the country going, oh, this tool is here. This tool has arrived. So that's sort of step one to go, it is actually here, and it's available. And it's available from an enterprise level. It's available from a personal level. It's available from a go-to-market level. It goes on and on and on. So this sort of robust calculator could do all sorts of things. So it really comes down to sort of accepting that this calculator, that this tool is here, and it's accessible to everybody at the moment.
Yeah, you said the word, and I was thinking it, the accepted part, right? Everyone in your area has already accepted that it is an AI economy, it is an AI ecosystem, right? And it is effectively table stakes as to how you, not just how do you do work, but how do you live, right? When you talk about the driverless cars and all of the things, you've accepted this reality. And I would say you guys have accepted it early, or I guess at the right time, depending on how you think about this. But you guys have been in this journey for a while now, and it predates just ChatGPT, like the Waymos and the Zooks and others. These products and services have already outdated, I would say, by years. I don't know exactly when the first Waymo dropped in Silicon Valley, but I've seen it for a while now, and yet I've still not. I don't know if I just have never gotten an opportunity or if I'm just self-selecting. I always feel like a dumbass too, because when I see one of these and I'm at like the crosswalk and I'm like going back and forth, like, should I walk? I don't see a driver. Because, I'm used to getting that eye contact. I'm like, you see me, man. You're not going to run over me, right? There's a social contract there that I no longer have.
Well, I'll tell you a quick funny story. I was crossing in front of a Waymo and it stopped. And I naturally waved to say thank you. So afterwards, I was like, "Oh, that was weird." I just waved at nobody. It's like this very natural thing, and I forgot actually how much human interaction there is when we drive, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we talk about people getting angry or road rage or whatever, but we also get friendly too. We're like, oh yeah, thanks for letting me in. Thanks for letting me cross the road. So I was saying thanks to this robot, right? And the robot doesn't really care. And it was a very sort of strange realization that we're entering a different time.
Yeah, that's you and I, we've talked offline before, and we both have children, and I try to teach my young kids about crosswalks and things. And one of the things I'm thinking back now, I'd say to them is like, hey, you need to make eye contact with that driver, because just because you're in a crosswalk does not mean that they see you, right? And so now I'm thinking, well, what the hell do I tell them now when there is no driver?
Yeah, well, now the reality is they make eye contact with the vehicle. And the vehicle has about 50 eyes that it's making contact with them, right? So it's weird.
So I have
It's
a
new.
feature request. Then it should at least flash the headlights or something, like give you a
Yeah,
little
that'd be
wink
cool.
or something.
Yeah, I like that.
Since we're on the topic now, I've introduced the kids into the conversation. How is that impacting you in your life? Like, you guys, it's not just AI, you still have your regular life to deal with. How is that coming up with the kids, and how are you getting them involved in understanding this AI ecosystem that is Silicon Valley?
I think AI, again, whether it's adults or children, really, if we think about it, the adults are bigger children than the children when it comes to new tech, right? So we're all whoever's born earlier than us or later than us, however you want to say it. Anybody younger than you is going to be more infused in the current tech than you are. So every 10 years, you're toast in a sense, right? So the kids will have a better understanding of it, but I think because they're being born into this time, right? There really is no. This is just what's being talked about. It's like being born into the time of color TVs or black and white TVs or no TVs or no telephones, right? There was a point in time where, a cordless phone was weird, right? Just cordless at all. So I think that, it's important. Schools right now, from colleges all the way down to grade schools, they're trying to figure out, like, what do we do with this? Like, is this cheating? Is this not cheating? Well, I don't know. Can the kids use a calculator? Right? So it goes back to the calculator question, right? So, and they can and they can't in certain things. So everybody's kind of reiterating, retooling for children and adults as well, as we learn these tools and as we learn what to do with them. But I certainly don't think there's any reason to be scared of them.
Adoption is something that, I talk a lot, from an AI adoption perspective, and I talk about there's cultural differences, there's things that we have to start to think about. It's not really the technology, right? That's the challenge, right? This thing allows us to talk in very natural ways, but there seems like there's some level of cultural difference across the country, right? How are you seeing that? I'm not certain how much you travel. Do you travel much to the East Coast or outside of Silicon Valley? Are you seeing any differences across the country?
Yeah, I certainly do. I see, depending on the part of the country, we could talk about sort of just the over-the-counter AI, right? Going on to ChatGPT or Claude, and talking to people in the Midwest who say, "Well, I don't know how to go on that," right? And these are not this is of all ages, right? And so, and then some people are already on it and moving forward with it. So I think it's staggered. Of course, in when you get into a tech hub like a Bay Area, it's being used at a pace that's much greater than across the rest of the country. But I do think it is slower adoption, personally, professionally, from an enterprise standpoint as you move across the country. And that's, part of the advisory work that I do is, helping these companies sort of position to, realizing that this tool exists and what do we do with it, and then there's so many versions of the tool, right? So I think, that the difficult part is it's overwhelming to adopt because it's so big, right? So that brings the question of how do you adopt, right? What do you do? How do you do it? And how do you bring it into your company?
And what are you seeing, right? So we talk a lot about, I know you and I have had a lot of conversations offline about go-to-market and talk about product market fit. One of the things I always am trying to explain to folks, I say, look, if 70 to 80% of your clients' budgets are going towards something AI related, you need to figure out how you attach to the AI economy. Otherwise, you're competing for the 20 or 30% of budget that's left. I don't know how you're seeing it or how you're positioning it with executives from a go-to-market perspective, but are you seeing folks understanding that? Do you see the reality differently as it relates to how budgets are being allocated and how folks are kind of viewing the product market fit in the age of AI?
Yeah, so we're seeing it a couple different ways, right? So it depends on the executive teams, the industry, and how they've adopted AI, and so there's two things happening here, right? So you've got acceptance from sort of an upper level where they say, okay, we need to get on this train. The train's it's going to leave the station. We're going to be left behind, and that's true. I mean, you got to get on the train because everybody's sort of doing it, so we could all sort of evolve at a similar pace. On the flip side, many of the AI companies who are building products, services, tools, realizing that not everybody is adopting in the same way. They can't wrap their head around this. This is maybe, and these are incredibly smart executives running big companies, whatever, but they're not there yet. So the sort of the way in by the companies creating the tools is to mesh AI into other tools. So we're seeing that just in the general public, right? So when we Google something now, AI is integrated into Google. You can't get away from it, right? So before, when we go on to Netflix, it was an algorithm, and it still is an algorithm, but the algorithm's now infused with AI. You can't get away from it. It's in there. So it's permeating the business world regardless. That being said, I think that the leaders that are more aware of it and more in tune with it will have an edge.
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of different podcasts I listen to. I listen to the 20 VC podcast, and Jason Lemkin is on there quite a bit, and he's in your area. And he talks a lot about the traditional, especially the traditional SaaS companies or traditional software companies. And he said, you've had the last 2 years to attach to the AI economy, right, in some way. You've had the last 2 years. You have smart people. The fact that you're not doing it, that's shame on you, right? And I do think that the impact is going to be significant. And we've seen this, whether there's a belief or not. I want your perspective on the whole SaaS apocalypse, kind of scenario that's happening and it's unfolding right now. You're seeing it quite a bit with, especially, I think Monday.com is kind of the prime example. I was listening to their CEO. From a pure business economics perspective, revenue is up, profitability is up, free cash flow, but they're not attached in the minds of many to the AI economy. He's basically said it's not the economics, it's the sentiment, right? And so what impact or what are you guys hearing or feeling within the SaaS community there? That has to be, you got traditional unicorns that are freaking out right now.
Yeah, well, I think adoption as you go up in the enterprise world, it's slower, right? These are a lot of this is dependent on the nimbleness of the company, right? So it's not just the nimbleness of the leader. So if we have a large enterprise, they can only be as nimble as they can be, right? If we have a massive cruise ship, we can't just like flip that thing around and go the other direction. It takes some time to turn the cruise ship around. Even if it's got bow thrusters and rear thrusters, whatever they called, they can spin this thing around, and the technology's great today as versus years ago, but it's still a big ship. It needs to turn around, and it needs time and all that stuff. So the more nimble companies can move quicker. That being said, it's important for these companies of all sizes to sort of take this seriously, but you are at a disadvantage if it's not being infused into the world of that corporation at a much larger level, because then you're lagging to begin with just based off size.
Yeah, I mean, to that point, that nimbleness, I wouldn't be doing my job. We wouldn't be having a real AI conversation if we don't talk about Jack Dorsey's decision a couple weeks ago, and the 4,000 person headcount reduction, if you will, right, that happened on that evening. I was telling some of my folks I was listening to a podcast, and it was the 20 VC and Jason Lemkin talking about it. He said that this thing is going to happen. There's going to be some CEOs out there that are going to understand what they can do. Again, regardless of whether or not the reason why you're cutting back is because maybe you overhired or you do believe in AI. The AI leaders have already confessed to the crime. By lunchtime that same day, I was talking to my whole team here at Walk West, and then by 8 o'clock that night, I got a bunch of texts, folks saying, "Hey, did you just see what happened at Block?" And I say all of that to say the other part that people need to understand is the very next day, the stock popped by almost 20%, right? It went up, right? So I imagine that there's going to be some level of this impact, whether it's from the investors pushing the executives themselves, right? The consumers. But folks are going to have to figure out how to become more nimble, to your point, right? So are you seeing or hearing or feeling that that's going to be an uptick, or is that just a blip?
Well, I think with any technological change in the landscape, and this one's a massive one, right? This is like a massive earthquake of change, of tectonic plates moving and creating mountains that weren't there before, right? So we've had this at other times. We've had this going from horses to cars, and we've had these big changes over time. So I think there's a couple things happening, right? So when we see companies that are doing layoffs, then the question becomes was this layoff really from COVID, or was this layoff because that was a good excuse? Is this layoff really from AI, or was that a good excuse? Well, of course, companies are going to use, publicly the story that works for that particular time as they scale down, scale up, whatever. That being said, there's truth to some of these things, right? With COVID, there was truth to needing layoffs. With AI, there is truth, and there's going to be truth to layoffs and that type of thing. That all being said, it's a shifting economy, right? So does it make it much more difficult for certain jobs over time? Yes. This is going to change the landscape for doctors, lawyers, customer service, go-to-market. There's a lot. Pretty much everything is going to be touched by it to some degree, but it shifts things to other things, right? So we then it creates other things that didn't exist, right? And there's other ways to leverage AI in another way that didn't exist before. So we're really just getting there's a ton of shifting that's happening. Do we know what it's going to look like on the other side? There's a lot of speculation. There's a lot of things that look logical, but we actually don't 100% know how this is going to play out. Remember, we're still at the beginning. This is an infant right now when it comes to AI.
Yeah. I think the part of the reason why I really wanted to do this discussion with you in particular is me being on the East Coast, and especially in the Southeast, and you in particular being in Silicon Valley, the Bay Area, right? My concern is that your group, your area is more adept at the constant change, right? I don't disagree in the shifting, right? Mm-hmm. What is challenging though is some areas where I am sitting today aren't as used to being as nimble, to use your word from earlier. It is a part of your economy and your ecosystem to constantly change and disrupt. That whole area disrupts, right? But when
That's
you get
right.
outside of that, I can tell you as just a point of fact, there's a lot of people that just don't want to change. And there's
That's right.
1,000 different reasons why. But I want to move off of that for just a second here. And I want to talk about go-to-market.
Mm-hmm.
I think, you have a brilliant brain when it comes to go-to-market, and you have superpowers in helping folks understand, because that's one of the things we talk about. It's like there's a lot of people that can build things now because of AI, but how do you actually sell things, right, in this economy? So what's your take on what's changed from a go-to-market perspective? How are you seeing the world, and what advice do you have?
Yeah, that's a good question. So go-to-market is obviously, it's a big umbrella. It's huge, right? It means so many things. There's many different levels of what this is going to mean. So as it relates to AI, we've got, like I said before, different layers of tools that are that will enhance rollouts for go-to-market. It'll enhance, looking into an MVP for a product. There's so many levels that we can use AI and infuse it into this. That all being said, the part, you've got that as a huge part, right? And wanting to be a part of this. But sort of on the other side is this human element. We are all still humans, and the human element hasn't gone away. And so that human element is really, really important. And then there's a third element. It's the connection of what's happening with AI and the human connection, and then connecting the two in order to make the go-to-market as successful as it needs to be. Because those three components are really at play, whether we like it or not, if we want to be on the forefront and on the cutting edge of go-to-market. We need to have the AI involved. We have to have that old school human connection, which down in your neck of the woods, they got it down, right? That old school human connection, they got it down. So those two need to be married together, and then there needs to be the connection between sort of new school and old school. Because the old school is not going away. Again, we're still human. We're here on this podcast together, right? These aren't avatars of ourselves. We're having a normal conversation offline. We have normal conversations. We text, we talk. This is cool. This is how we're wired. We want this, and we want this in business too, right? So go to market. We need this from a B2C, from a B2B. We need a human element. But now that we have this other component, that needs to be a part of it too.
Yeah, I talk a lot about the human edge, and I always remind people that business is personal, and that, people buy from other people, right? Now,
That's right.
It may be AI mediated, right? We may send off in the very near future our AI agent to be a representative of Brett, of a representative of Greg, right? But still, at the end of the day, it's people buying from people. And I say it all the time, is like, in a world where endless content can be created at the push of a button, right? It's going to create a trust deficit that will require us to be more in person, to be more present, right? But what I do see quite a bit, especially as I talk to marketers and sales folks, is I always used to say in any type of digital transformation or business transformation, I would say, people, process, platform, in that order always, right? Because it doesn't matter, to me, it doesn't matter what tool, it doesn't matter what your process was, right? You have to change from a people perspective. You have to understand the change management necessary. But what ends up happening in reality, when I talk to especially enterprise and larger mid-market companies, is they first go right to the tool. Which tool should I buy? Right? Well, there's 1,000 different ones you could buy, right? And then we start looking at, well, how does this make my process faster? Well, AI doesn't give a shit about your process. It only cares about the outcome, right? And so how are you seeing AI disrupting? You gave those three kind of phases, or those three different elements. But what about AI is changing the historical way folks did go to market to then incorporate the human element and the overall connection of all of that?
AI is disrupting it in the sense, the biggest sense would be speed, right? Speed and velocity and volume, right? So if it was somebody wanted to do an outbound marketing campaign, whether it be through email or any other matter, we can kind of sick AI on it and go, okay, do this, right? And so that push gets exponentially put out there. But then again, well, how do you tie that back in so it doesn't feel like somebody's getting like robots are reaching out, because that's not very personal, right? So again, that human element needs to always be woven in. And to your point, People buy from people they like, but people also buy from companies they like. So if you make them feel uncomfortable, you lost them. If you make them feel comfortable, you won them, right? And so that's really easy to do. I mean, Greg, you're a nice guy. You can walk into a room and you can make friends with somebody, and you're immediately, you've earned their trust on a one-on-one. Now we go ahead and we replicate Greg out 10,000 times. We have to make sure that it still has the element of Greg that's trustworthy, that's likable, that has a product that, even if it's a company you're leading, it needs to be infused in that AI push. If it is not, you'll lose. There's no way around it. If it is infused, you win every time, right? Because the essence of Greg is so powerful, we want to make sure that whether it's Greg and or the company culture, the product, the brand, whatever it is, that is sort of meshed into the AI as we push it out there.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. Trying to scale that one-to-one is a very challenging endeavor, right? Because you do run that risk of, especially from an AI perspective, we think about personalization, right? People have been talking about hyper-personalization at scale forever, at least the last 15 years. Now we have the capability to do it. Now you have to ask yourself, are we really talking microsegmentation? Are we talking hyper-personalization one-to-one? Because there is a world in which you do too much hyper-personalization, it starts to border on creepiness, right? And then that turns folks off. Then, to your point, then you lose that trust and you break it down. How do you balance that? And how do you use AI, do you think, or do you not use AI to help scale that? Do you have some tips there?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I mean, this is nuanced as it relates to the company, the push, the product. So it's hard to answer on a whole, but I'll give an example. Leaning too far into AI from a marketing standpoint can easily lose. So if we're talking about this hyper-personalization, could easily lose somebody. So I get pitched all the time on LinkedIn, right? I'm getting, it seems like 50 emails a day via LinkedIn or messages a day via LinkedIn. And many of these are created from some sort of AI bot that's scanning my LinkedIn profile and scanning my background, whatever, and saying like, oh, hey, Brett, blah, 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 blah. And what ends up happening is the people that are, or companies that are using these tools, they're hyper-personalizing everything to a point where that's not humanly natural. And it sounds stupid, actually. It's like, okay, well, that's the most impersonal thing. I would rather you just write an impersonal note to me, and it would be more personal than the AI note that you had created. And where this also gets tricky is when the tools aren't tweaked in the right way or used in the right way, your company sounds like everybody else because the tool you put in the same input that everybody puts in, and then it brings out the same output. So this is a whole nother podcast episode, but input versus output when it comes to AI. And I don't care if you're talking on a personal level, on a corporate level, an enterprise level. If you don't have good inputs, you're not going to get good outputs. And if you have good inputs and you get good outputs, you have to know how to understand what those outputs mean and do something with it. So again, we might have had this conversation too at some point. I'm not a very handy person. If you give me a drill, right, like I'm not going to do a good job with it. You could tell me some basics, but I'm not going to be great with it. But somebody who's great with the drill is going to do a lot better. They're going to build something, beautiful, and I might build a table that doesn't stand. I don't know, but like you need to learn how to use these tools appropriately. So once you do, then they work well, and if you don't, then they could actually hurt you.
Yeah, you touched on several different things, right? We did have a conversation about the tools, and I always use the same analogy that, give me 4 ingredients to cook a meal, it's going to be okay. Give the same 4 ingredients to Bobby Flay, it's going to be amazing, right? You give someone that's a domain expert the right tools, right? Not just any tool, but the right tools, and it's going to be amazing. The other thing you touched on was, it's always been in the data space, garbage in, garbage out. And so what I tell people in the AI world, it's not just garbage in, garbage out, it's garbage in, catastrophic outcomes on the other side, right? Because AI is going to scale it beyond, the limits of what we're able to comprehend. The other thing you reminded me of, especially on LinkedIn, I love the AI automated ones where it's like the 10th time someone says, this is the last time I'm going to reach out to you. It's clear that you're busy. Like, shit, if it's the last time, would you please stop reaching out to me?
That's right.
And it gets to a point where I have to block them because it's never the last time, right? Because AI is goal-oriented that people don't realize, and it is trying to accomplish a goal. It is only trying to manipulate me until I finally click on it, right? I want your take real quick here, and then I'm going to get into kind of a speed round of sorts we call Last Chat. But before we do that, I just want to get your take on AI SDRs, right? What do you think about them? Do you see value? Are you leveraging them? What's your honest take right now on the AI SDR?
I think for the right company and the right push, it could work well, right? So these AI SDRs, and again, like any good AI tool, it has to be matched up with the appropriate push. Right. So if we're talking about something that's highly customized, a high ticket item, we're selling, one of a kind original artwork. Well, we still need a human behind that. That human needs to pick up the phone, have relationships. It's an old school kind of thing. If we're talking about something that's, we can reach out in a repeatable way to 50,000 people in a month or a week even, then that's where the advantage of something like this comes into play. So it really is like anything, like we're talking about with tools or cooking or anything, right? We want to match up the tool to what it is. Like, are we creating food for an entire banquet hall, or are we creating a meal for 4 people that's going to be really we're going to the farmer's market or whatever, and we're going to have a farm to table, really beautiful meal. So there's two different goals here. In the end, I think it's great. I think there's a lot of great tools out there, but using that AI SDR in a way that matches up is what's important.
Yeah. And do you differentiate between the AI SDR that is more of a chat bot versus the avatar that looks like a human? Like I was on a podcast and I was like, I get like the science behind it. I say, but I don't really think you need to bring back my dead grandmother to sell me a CRM. Like, I don't understand why, if I know I'm talking to a robot, why do you have to make it look like a human? I don't really understand that. But what's your view on this?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of psychology behind this, right? So on whether or not, here you're having this emotional reaction, right? And you understand branding and marketing and sales. I think that again needs to be matched up to the right product, right? And then it needs to be tested, and you really need to listen to your customers to know, or clients, is this beneficial or is this irritating people? Right? Would we be better off if this was like, just a flat cartoon versus trying to be like a complete human? Are we really there? Or, are we moving into creepy when we could move into enjoyable? Right? So there's ways to use the tool in a way that matches with that audience. And in some cases it's faceless, right? Through a chatbot. That's just a faceless chatbot, and that works for people and it works for companies, right? But it's paying attention to what people's reactions really are, as opposed to just being the genius behind, oh, this is a great idea. Well, maybe it's not. Like, we don't know. Is it? Your customers will let you know if it's a great idea.
Yeah, the market will always tell you. And to your point, there is this potential that you get into this uncanny valley where it starts to turn someone off, because you get in this moment where it looks like you're having a conversation with the real human, and then there's that tick or that glitch or that one thing. And now, to your point from earlier, you lost all trust with that brand, not just with that product or that opportunity, right? Because then that goes viral. I think one of the challenges for me when I think about a lot of the thought leadership and the great things that come out of Silicon Valley that I'm reading is there tends to be this is just my perspective, and I would love to get your perspective on this, but so much comes out of Silicon Valley that's focused on B2B SaaS type companies that are one-to-many in what they're trying to sell, that a lot of the things and the opportunities and the products and even the thought leadership is really focused on that model. And to your point, and people try to take that parallel and say, oh, well, I'm selling this other thing. I heard that I should use this. I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. in a B2B SaaS world. But if that's not your industry, your sales motion, your ICP, you have to think about this differently. But, what, I guess my question here, and actually let's just jump in the last chat here, a little bit of a speed round. And I'm going to use this as the first question here. Is Silicon Valley ahead, or are things just louder there? Like, what's the reality?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a nuanced answer, right? It's ahead in certain things, and it's louder in certain things, but there's other parts of the country that are ahead in other things, right? And that's industry based. But as far as ahead, the good news is we all have the same availability for these products anywhere in the country or services, and we're in a day and age of knowledge. It's all there. It's all available for the taking, and the knowledge is free.
The knowledge is free. What about the talent? What's your hot take on that? Do you have to be in Silicon Valley to succeed in this AI economy?
Well, so what do you mean exactly? The talent, is it only here in Silicon Valley? Is that the question?
I mean, I keep hearing, everyone keeps saying the only way that you can grow a company, the only way that you can do something related to AI is if you're in the thick of things in Silicon Valley. Now, obviously, I don't feel that way. I'm in the Southeast, but I want to understand what's driving the perspective.
Yeah, I don't agree with that on a whole. I guess it depends on what you're doing and what type of engineers that company is looking for. I mean, there's several companies that have a huge presence in Silicon Valley, but they have employees all over the globe, right? There are talented people on this planet, and they are all over the place, right? And is there a heavy concentration here in Silicon Valley? Yeah, sure. We have a lot of AI companies. We have, a lot of just Silicon Valley tech companies that are a magnet to these people. But yes, there's a lot of talent here, but there's a lot of talent globally and across the country in AI as well.
That makes me feel a little bit better about what I'm doing and what we're trying to build here in the Southeast. What's one thing that Silicon Valley gets wrong about AI?
I think I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I think the thing that, and this is where I help companies a lot, is it a lot of times becomes so engineer focused and technical tech focused, and the human element is missing. And this is for startups, is for multi-billion-dollar companies. So I think that it's very easy to sort of slip into this ultra tech mindset and forget this relationship mindset, this human mindset, because it didn't go away, right? And there's so much focus on all the technicality. I think that's what Silicon Valley gets wrong, and it creates a huge edge when you bring it back. And you bring it back in.
All right. One final question for you. If you're advising a company on how they can become more AI forward, if not AI first, what's the one thing that you would tell them to start doing today?
It's a more of a thematic answer, which is drop the fear. Just drop the fear. And that's step one. And that's fear of AI itself. That's fear of what to do with AI. That's fear of change. That's fear of what your corporation might think, what the neighborhood might. I don't care what the fear is. And the good news for leadership is most of them got to the leadership role because they were able to drop the fear in other categories. Now it's time to drop the fear in this category.
Hey, we're on AI Voice of Victim, right? That was part of the reason why we started this podcast, was to help people understand that the fear is real and they need to drop it. And so I appreciate you dropping that on us and our audience. So with that, Brett, we're going to wrap up here. That was an awesome ending, and I appreciate your time.
Thanks so much, Greg. Great seeing you.
Thanks for joining us on AI Voice of Victim. If you want to stay competitive in the age of AI, start now. Take one insight from today's episode and put it into practice in the next 24 hours. Make sure to follow us, share your thoughts, and subscribe for more actionable AI insights. See you next time.